Okay, so I'm not actually going to make an introduction in this video because this video is actually directed more so towards the students of my class. So if you're one of the subscribers who are waiting for a Discord bot tutorial, that is going to be coming out in the future, soon in the future. I don't know, depends on when I actually have the time to make them. But for now, if you want to follow along, that's completely okay as well. Now, I wanted to make this tutorial because I made a quote-unquote API for creating menus in Visual Basic. Now, if you're not using Visual Basics, that's also okay because you can really convert this to any languages that you want and it'll still really work. You just have to make minor changes. But anyways, in our class or school, presumably the entire school, like the entire faculty for computer science, is going to tell you to make a console application in Visual Basics because that's the language that we learn at school. And they're most likely going to tell you to create a menu alongside of it. And so it gets repetitive, especially if you get that every assignment. It just says, create a menu, create another menu, and it just becomes really, really repetitive. And there is a thing that says practice makes perfect, but the problem with this is that you're creating it too much and you're already familiar with it, and that you're doing it excessively. So there's also a saying that excess of everything is bad. So if you're already familiar with it, there is no real reason as to why you want to, code it again over and over. So that's why I made this menu API, quote unquote. If you're new to programming, it is really, really recommended that you actually code it at least once yourself because there's a reason why school tells you to create a menu. Because creating a menu teaches you a lot of things, like the very basics of everything. Obviously, you're going to learn about data types because you are going to need to use those for your menu. You're also going to technically learn data structures, very, very little though, like arrays and whatnot. Depends on how you're actually coding the menu. You also learn about iteration or recursion as well. Now, once again, this really depends on how you're writing the code. And you also learn about selections, like if statements and case statements. Once again, it depends on which one you prefer. But either way, it is a very good way to learn the basics of programming. So creating a menu on your own at least once is always a good thing. But once you're really, really familiar already and it gets repetitive, that's when you're supposed to use this quote-unquote API. So let's get started. We are on the repository for VB menu. Now, once again, I've already mentioned if you're using a different programming language, just need to make minor changes. There are multiple tools out there on the internet that converts Visual Basics to, for example, C#. Not so sure if you can convert it to Java, but more or less should be the same, especially since C# is part of the .NET framework. Anyways, without dragging this any further, this project here is, you can go ahead and click here and then download this as a zip file, and then you can open this in Visual Studio. And then what will happen is after you run, you have the solution in, or rather the project in Visual Studio, and you can just go ahead and run the program, which this is not the case here. You will run the program, and just so that you can test how the menus work and get a feel for it. But once you have that done, really you only care about this base menu.vb file. You can open this up, or you can copy it, or after you download it. But strictly speaking, this is really all that you need. This is basically the base menu. This is an abstract class. If you already know object-oriented programming, which you should already do if you're doing A-levels, then most of this should make sense, aside from maybe the must inherit keyword here, which makes this class an abstract class. It essentially means that you can't create an instance of this. I'm not going to go into details on this, but essentially this is the only file that you're actually going to need. So essentially, just go ahead and download this, or you can just go ahead and copy this file. To copy this file, really just open this, go to here, click on raw. You're gonna then get this in raw format, just select everything and just copy it. Right, we're just gonna do that since we already copied it, and then you're gonna go over to your program here, whatever program that you actually need a menu in. You're just gonna go ahead and create a new file. To create a new file, just Control-Shift-A, and then create a class. We're just gonna call it the same thing. We're just gonna call it the base menu, and we're gonna add the file. This is going to add this file here. We're just gonna go ahead and paste the entire code in here, and we can just leave this here. right? We can just leave this here. If you're using something like an online IDE, that's completely fine because you can actually just paste the class in the main file as well. It doesn't really matter, but it's just a lot cleaner to separate your code into different files if possible. So the base menu is just going to sit there. Now we're going to now create a menu so we can actually know what we're doing. So I created a file using Ctrl+Shift+A earlier, but normally maybe you would just right click on this menu tutorial here. You're going to go down to add and then new item. And then this is the exact same prompt. So we're going to call this main menu because this is going to be the menu that we're going to see the moment we run our program. So the first thing we need to do is inherit the base menu. So if you've done our object-oriented already, you should already know what inheritance is. So now you're going to see an error, which is a red squiggly line, because it's going to tell you that you have not declared a subnew or the constructor for a base menu. And that's because you have to, that's because the base menu actually requires a few things in its parameters in its constructor. So to do that, we'll just do a subnew. So we'll just create a constructor for the base menu. And you can see that the red wiggly is actually moved down here. So what you need to do is do mybase.new. This is going to instantiate the constructor for the base menu. So now what you would see is another red squiggly line because you actually need to pass in an argument that is required and one argument that is optional. So you can actually just go ahead and leave it. So if you just hover over it, you can probably see that it says menu context is an array of strings. And you also see an optional argument called prefix num is boolean equals to false by default. We'll go to the prefix num in a little bit, but let's focus a little bit on the menu context. You may not know what a menu context is, what I mean by this. So if you go down to this drop down menu at file, for example, this menu here has many options. The different options are actually called a context. So when I say the menu context, I actually means different options that you're going to have on your menu. And in other words, it's simply going to be a string of an array of string defining what this option is going to do. So how do you actually add this array? Well, you can just simply open curly braces. In fact, if you just open curly braces, the wiggly red lines are gone. But I'm just going to separate this into a new line right here like so because it's cleaner. Now the red line is back because it's not really an empty array anymore. So you can just put strings in here. So just like that, you have an array of strings. You may or may not want to declare a new variable for this, but it doesn't really matter. You can just create an array like this. So for example, my first option is going to be add two numbers together, and then my second option would be to maybe subtract two numbers, right? Subtract two numbers. And my third option is going to simply be exit. So these are going to be the different options that is going to be available in my program. And now we also have an optional argument called prefix num. And now this is actually going to be pretty useful if you don't want to type in the numbers that you see right here, because what this will do is if you set this to true, it'll automatically prefix the numbers here. Now the reason why you may want this to be false is because maybe you want to customize this a little bit. Maybe you don't want to have 3 dot something. Maybe you want to have a bracket. Maybe you want to have the numbers inside a bracket like this. It really depends on preferences, but by having this set to true, you write even less code, I suppose. Just omit the numbers. So I'm just going to leave this as false because I want to know the different numbers, the different options in here. So that's basically that. So now you may want to add a title to your menu, because if your option, for example, creates another menu, opens another menu, then well, now that menu is going to be a submenu. So how do I know which menu I'm in? Well, first I could probably read the different options and know what menu I'm on. But at the same time, I don't want to read every single options to know what menu I'm on. I want to look at the title and know exactly what menu that is. So how do you add a title? Well, you can just simply overload the display method. So we're going to go ahead and overload. Can't type. Overloads the display method. And then we're going to call mybase.display, and you can go ahead and pass in an optional argument here. So you can see the menu title. So it's set to nothing by default because there's no title. Now you can go ahead and say this is the main menu. So that is going to be the title of our menu. So now that's all good and dandy. So now if we go over to our program here, just really quickly do this. We're just going to go ahead and create a new instance of the main menu, and we're going to do .display. And then there's also another option. There's another method which is the select option. We're going to go into more details on the select option in a little bit. Now you see I'm using the with keyword here. Now that's because I don't need a variable. Now if you want to use a variable, that's completely fine. In fact, you probably want to use a variable when it comes to A level because exam boards may not accept this as a solution. But anyways, let's just run this real quick, and you're going to see that we have our main menu. Here's our title here, and you can see we have our different options that we set right here, appear here. Now if we input something like 0, which is not part of the menu, you can see it's going to ask us to input again. 4, once again, it's outside the menu, it's outside the range. Once again, we are asked to input again. So if we input a string, this is also handled. It makes us enter again. So if we press 1 now, it just exits because there is nothing to do. The program does not know what to do with these options yet. So how do you implement this? There are two different ways. There's the manual way or there's the auto way. Now, technically speaking, it's technically both manual because you still need to code the functionality. But what I mean by auto is that a lot of the option selections is basically handled for you. You just have to code the functionality. Whereas with the manual way, you have to code the selection itself. So I'll really quickly go over the auto way. I'll show you how. I'll just show you the example code for the manual. So if you go over the manual, you can see that I overload the select option method as well, and then I call the select option and then set it into a variable. That's because if we go over to our base menu here, if we scroll down to our select option, it's a function that returns an integer. And the integer that it returns is the menu option, which is the input that we gave when we were inputting. So immediately we know exactly already what option we have selected. So that already is handled for you. So all you need to do is actually work with the select case here. For example, maybe you want to use an if statement instead. And then we have to handle all of this ourselves, and including overloading the select option method. So what if we don't want to do that? Well, we can use the auto way. So the way to do that, to make it auto, is simply set this to true. So in the select option here, we set a variable here. We set an argument to true because the argument that the base menu takes here is actually auto handle. It is by default set to false. Now if you run it again, and then we go ahead and select one of the options, you can see this time instead of just quitting the program immediately, you can see that it says the method is not implemented. Press any key to continue, and it takes us back to the menu. There's a bug here that the title isn't showing. I'll fix that later. But yeah, for the most part, it says menu and the method is not implemented, and we can fix that just by simply adding some code. So how do we actually fix that? Well, we can come down here, and this is going to be very, very case sensitive. So all you need to do is sub option with a capital O, by the way. This is very, very case sensitive. And then a number that follows. In this case, we're going to be using 1. Now, what is this number that follows option? 1 actually indicates the option number. So for example, 1 here, that is going to be the option 1. So if we type 1 as when we select our option, this is the method that's going to be running. Now, how does this work? If you look at base menu, this is done using something called reflections. Now, this is beyond A levels. So you can see the O is a capital O, and then option, and then followed by a number, which is our menu option. So once again, you don't really need to know how reflections work for A levels, but that's completely fine if you want to take a look into how this works. Now then, let's take a look in our code. So how do we add two numbers? Well, we can go ahead and create a method, another method here, which is going to say a function of input nums The reason why we want to create a function here is because an array and an integer. The reason why we want to do this is because, well, we're gonna do the input twice. So we're gonna have add and subtract, and we're gonna have to input for both of these. So both options are going to use the same method. Are going to do the same thing. So by having a method, we reduce code duplication. So we're going to go ahead and say console.write, for example, here. I'm just going to go ahead and skip along. Okay, so I really quickly created the function for inputting numbers. Obviously, you can actually do this in a loop as well. That's completely fine. But we're inputting num1 and num2, and then we're just simply returning an array of integer down here. Once again, the curly braces defines that this is an array. And we're separating using a comma. That's how you would declare an array without actually declaring one, I guess. So now we can just go ahead and say that the nums inside of our option 1 is going to be simply just do input nums. So input nums. You don't actually need to specify the data type because it is inferred, but if you want to, you can go ahead and do that as well. You don't need to specify a size because this is once again inferred from the output here. So next we just need to know what the results are, so we can just go ahead and console.write the line for this. So we can just do 0 plus 1 is equal to here, and we're going to just pass in nums0 and then nums1. These are just simply the index. So now we can just go ahead and do just that, and this will work. Now if we run our code real quick, and if we go and type 1, you can see that it says first num and the second num, and then you can see 1 plus 2 equals 3, and then you can press any key to continue, and this is already handled for you automatically. So this is a very, very useful way. This makes you write even less code, and you can get directly into what you need to actually do. Now this input nums obviously is very bare bones. I didn't even handle any sort of errors when it comes to, like, for example, inputting in strings instead of numbers. But this will be fine for now, for example's sake. Now if we want to have an option 2, in fact this is so similar that we can just go and copy and paste this here, and we just change this to option 2. And then we'll go to do minus here instead, and that would basically be it. Now if you run this, we can go ahead and press 2 this time, and we're going to subtract a 3 from 2, and we get 1 really easily. So now the 3 is not implemented yet, so how do we implement it? So very easy. We create a subroutine here, sub3, and sub3 means the third option, and all we need to do to exit is environment.exit, and then we pass in an exit code of 0 because it's exited successfully. 0 means exit successful, and 1 means there was an error happening. But since we exited it and it's meant to happen, then the exit code 0 is completely correct. So we can just do that. If we run it, we can add 2 numbers together, we can see the result, and then we can subtract 2 numbers together, and then we can see the result, and then we can quit. We exit, everything is done. Very nice. So that's essentially how you're going to use this API. All you really have to do is copy the base menu and into your project, inherit the base menu, and then you just write a few code like this, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to handle the option inputs, and you don't even need to handle the errors from the option inputs. You don't have to do anything very serious. All you have to do is just really quickly create a constructor, place in what you need the options to be, and then create a display menu. Maybe well, you're gonna set the title of the menu, and then you can start writing the functionality of your program. You don't have to worry too much about it. Everything down here are code for your functionality. If you just remove this code, your menu, this is your menu. That's all the code you need to write for your menu, and the rest down here, that's all the functionality of your actual program. So as you can see, by having the base menu class here and inheriting it, you're writing so much less code than you would otherwise need to. So with that said, go experiment with it. I need to fix the bug of the title not showing after I use the auto feature. But after that, that's pretty much it.